Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Bill. Appreciate it.
Well, let's see. You started this writing journey of yours. As I understand it, it really started like a lot of people, in truth, when you were just a wee lad. Is that so? That you recognized early on this is something you're interested in?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I wanted to be a writer for many, many years before I really did anything, useful in terms of actually realizing that dream. I think it was, when I read Lord of the Rings. It took me like a year to read it. I was carting around this enormous.
How old were you?
I was 8.
So you're introduced to stories and the imagination, and boom, that's it. And you think, I want to do this. Did you think I want to write fantasy literature, or you just wanted to write stories? You didn't think about it?
Yeah, back then I started writing sort of 10-page, which for an 8-year-old was like my 1,000-page.
Yeah, it's like Ulysses.
I'd write these very quite grisly kind of fantasy stories where everyone seemed to die at the end. I seemed to have this unpleasant streak when it came to my characters. But and then that kind of morphed into a teenage kind of, I was a goth and I wrote poetry. Very despairing, and obviously massively focused on me and my feeling, universalizing my feelings.
Yep.
And then really I still wanted to be a writer, and I would still sort of, probably tell people I was going to be a writer or whatever. But then I wasn't really writing, or I was only writing when inspiration would strike.
Yeah.
And that went on for a long time. And it was really only in my 30s that I sort of actually started getting up every day and writing before I would go to work. And that was when I actually started producing work that was something like the idea I had in my head of what I wanted my writing to be like.
Interesting.
Like before that, I was writing stuff and I was like, this doesn't really marry up with what I want to be producing, although I couldn't quite define exactly what I wanted. I had this sort of platonic ideal, but it was sort of hazy, out of focus.
Even though you weren't writing your fiction, you were writing. You were being paid to write. First you were a critic. Is it for The Guardian? Who did you write for?
Yeah, I started writing for the Times of London, and
right.
And then after that, The Guardian. I started writing this. Well, originally weekly, but that was a folly. It was a series on the short story. I would take a different short story writer in each, and then I would write an essay about their work. In toto, Rudyard Kipling or Dennis Johnson or Jane Bowles or whomever it was. And I kept that going for, well, it hasn't officially ended, but it was called A Brief Survey of the Short Story, but it's in its 14th year now.
Wow.
So.
Wow.
Yeah.
See, I find it so interesting when I get together with my friends who are literary writers and the subject of critics comes up. It is not always a friendly conversation, because it seems to me that the literary writer, more than any other, let's call it genre, any other type of writer, has a kind of love-hate relationship with the critic, because they, in a way, need the reviews, I think, to some degree, more than a romance writer or mystery writer or fantasy or science fiction writer. But man, do they get a little tweaky when those reviews aren't what they, for obvious reasons. And so yet you started that way. Does the part of you that was a critic ever, like, how do those two minds mesh, the fiction writer and the critic? Are they friendly? Are they unfriendly?
They're on speaking terms. Yeah, there's an amicable relationship with them. Yeah, definitely. I think it's been on a sort of parallel track for me because I wanted to be a writer, from age 8.
Right.
So, and as in a fiction writer, I mean, when my first book, which was a collection of stories called Mothers, came out in 2018, a lot of people asked, how does it feel to kind of be gamekeeper turned poacher, or poacher turned gamekeeper? I'm not sure.
Right.
John's a witch, but it was like, oh, you've been a critic for this long, and now you're, sort of subjecting yourself to that. But because in my head I'd been a writer, because you're a writer if you want to be a writer, even if you're not necessarily writing every day. So for me, it was like, oh no, I've always been a fiction writer. I just haven't been writing any fiction. But so it didn't feel like that to me. But I think those two things, I can understand writers having a complex relationship with criticism, because like fiction writing, there are a lot of people who write criticism badly, and there are some people who write it really well, and you're not necessarily, even if you get like a good review of your book, you might look at it as a piece of writing and go, I don't really really agree with that, or I don't really get. I mean, obviously if someone slags off your book, you can console yourself by going, well, that person's an idiot, and I'm just gonna ignore them. And you always think that for like the first 24 hours, and then sometimes you might go, oh, well, that point was well made, or maybe they had a point here. I think you've got to kind of, I don't know. I mean, I find being a writer a weird mix of sort of massive self-confidence and huge yawning self-doubt, and those two things kind of exist at the same time.
I really like the voice. Where is it? There it is. Let's move some paper. This is the American edition, A Lonely Man by Chris Power. Now, I love the voice in this. It's just really friendly. I don't know if you want it to be, but it's very inviting, very smart, very clean, very clean. I liked it. But I feel I should warn our viewers and listeners, many of whom are writers, this is like maybe a trigger warning, because the book, I went through this a little PTSD. The book is about a novelist. The book is about a novelist who had published a collection of short stories and is trying to write his next book, and it is not going well. Talk to me about that. A decision to write about a writer, it always seems like a tricky choice, but the story presents itself. So maybe start there. Was it something you were worried about, or were you excited about it?
For me, it was really it was a kind of circuitous path to that character, because it's funny that I have a sort of theory that whatever you're writing about is what someone will be complaining about on Twitter. So it seemed like while I was writing this, there's always someone posting like, "Oh, not another effing book about a writer." Like,
right.
I was like, well, mine's got two writers in it, so maybe that's different. But actually, the sort of way in, because there's a strand in the book that's about oligarchs and Putin's Russia, and these sort of a number of deaths that have occurred throughout Europe and in America of people who've sort of fled Russia and criticized the administration there. It was really that sort of story that interested me first. People like Alexander Litvinenko, who was poisoned in London back in 2006, and the succession of these cases. But as I was reading more about it, just out of grisly interest, not necessarily thinking of a book at that point, once I did start thinking of it in terms of a story I wanted to tell, it was actually, the idea of a ghostwriter really appealed to me, because that's a way you can get into a world without being of that world, and needing to sort of understand it, but without being complicit in it, because it's a pretty murky world. And I didn't necessarily want someone who was sort of, while that could be great material for a novel itself, it wasn't the novel I was looking to write. And then this character of Robert, who in some ways is very like me, and in other ways I should, caveat is not. I'll let each reader decide which is which. He sort of emerged because, well, I mean, that's the mystery of it, I guess. I think it'll be the
mystery's good. The mystery's good.
Well, you start writing something and you make so many sort of thousands of choices in quite a short space of time that it comes to seem like I don't really believe that talk of like, oh, the characters just started talking to me or whatever. But I think what it is that you make so many choices that you can't find your way back through the tangled forest of them. And so it does seem like a like a sentient thing, if you like. You spend long enough with the idea and working on it that it starts to generate its own meanings and its own possibilities.
Yeah.
And so Robert sort of grew out of that. So I can't accurately state where he came from.
Great. Well, listen, congratulations. They can buy it wherever fine books are sold, of course. But I got one more question for you. And Chris, what I would like you to do is finish this sentence. If writing, all the writing you've ever done, has taught you anything, it's taught you what?
The importance of perseverance.
Do you think you weren't someone who took perseverance for granted before, or just how did it teach you that you maybe didn't understand before?
I think I was someone who was naturally lazy, who would, pursue things that they had a facility for and would kind of throw in the towel on everything else. And then I found this one thing that I really wanted to do, and I didn't think I was good enough at it, but I, tried to leave it alone for many years when I was like saying I wanted to be a writer, but not really writing, but it wouldn't let me go. I had to do it. And then I realized that to be good at it, you had to like do it for a long time and try again and again and again.